Hey, my name's Nathaniel Hart. I'm 29 years old and I own Hartwood Estate, a sprawling olive farm nestled in the Sonoma Valley of Northern California. I grew up here, but I've never really felt like I belonged. My parents died in a car accident when I was 12, leaving me this massive property, hundreds of acres of ancient olive groves, a grand old house with creaking wooden floors, and outbuildings filled with presses and storage tanks. It's a fortune on paper, but it's always felt more like a curse than a blessing. The estate comes with strings attached, woven into my parents' will like thorns in the olive branches. If I don't marry and have a legitimate child by the time I turn 30, everything goes to my two aunts and uncles, Benedict and Gertrude Hart. They're not family in the warm sense. They're vultures circling overhead, waiting for me to fail so they can swoop in and sell the land to some big winery conglomerate. They've been pressuring me for years, sending lawyers with reminders, dropping by unannounced to check on things. As my birthday creeps closer, the calls have gotten more frequent, the threats more veiled. I've started avoiding town, holing up in the house with its high ceilings and empty rooms. The farm runs itself mostly. I've got a manager, Harlan, who's been here longer than I have, and a crew of workers who handle the harvesting and pressing. But me? I just wander the groves, checking equipment, tasting the oil, trying to convince myself this life is enough. That afternoon in late June, the California sun was beating down mercilessly, turning the air thick and hazy. The temperature had to be pushing 100 degrees, and the olive trees shimmered in the heat like a mirage. I'd just finished inspecting the pressing machines in the main barn, old beasts of metal that hummed and groaned during harvest season, when I heard a commotion at the front gate. Voices raised, not in anger exactly, but firm. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand and walked over, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway. There, at the wrought iron gates that marked the entrance to Hartwood, stood Harlan, my grizzled old manager. He was facing off with a young woman I'd never seen before. She looked small and fragile against the massive gates, her brown hair matted and tangled, her old jacket soaked through despite the heat. Must have been from a sudden downpour earlier in the day. Her face was gaunt, shadows under her eyes speaking of exhaustion and hunger. She couldn't have been more than 28, dressed in faded jeans and worn sneakers that had seen better days. "Please," she was saying, her voice steady but edged with desperation. "I just need any job. Cleaning, gardening, anything. I'll work hard, I promise." Harlan crossed his arms, his weathered face set in a scowl. "We ain't hiring, miss. Especially not strays off the road begging for handouts. This is private property. Best you move along before I call the sheriff." She didn't flinch at his words, just stood there with quiet dignity, her shoulders squared. But before she could respond, something happened across the road. An elderly woman, Mrs. Evelyn Porter, one of our regular buyers who lived nearby and often stopped by for fresh olive oil, was crossing the street with her cane. The pavement was still slick from the rain and her foot slipped. She went down hard, letting out a sharp cry as she hit the ground. Without a second's hesitation, the stranger, Rose, as I'd later learned, bolted across the road. She knelt beside Mrs. Evelyn, ignoring the mud soaking into her knees. "Are you okay? Let me help you up," she said gently, slipping an arm around the old woman's waist and carefully lifting her to her feet. She dusted off Mrs. Evelyn's coat, guided her to the safety of the curb, and sat her down on a low stone wall. "Does it hurt anywhere? Should I call someone?" Mrs. Evelyn, clutching her cane, looked up with wide eyes. "Oh dear, thank you. I think I'm fine. Just a bruise." "You're an angel, child." I watched the whole thing from the gate, frozen in place. Harlan muttered something about troublemakers, but I wasn't listening. This woman, this complete stranger with nothing to her name, had dropped everything to help someone in need. No hesitation, no expectation of reward. When she looked up, straightening Mrs. Evelyn's hat with a soft smile, her eyes caught the light, clear, determined, unflinching. In that moment, I saw something rare. Integrity in the face of desperation. She wasn't low or desperate in the way Harlan implied. She was resilient, the kind of person who held on when the world tried to break them. "Harlan," I called out, my voice cutting through the tension. "That's enough." He turned, surprised. "Sir, I said enough." I walked over, opening the gate myself. Rose looked at me warily as I approached, but she didn't back down. Up close, I could see the dirt on her hands the way her jacket hung loose on her frame. "Come inside," I said, gesturing toward the house. "You look like you could use a break." She hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Evelyn one last time to make sure she was steady. The old woman nodded gratefully. "Go on, dear. Mr. Hart here's a good man." Rose followed me up the driveway, her steps cautious. I led her to the shaded porch of the main house where wicker chairs overlooked the groves. "Sit," I told her, disappearing inside for a moment. I returned with a clean towel from the linen closet and a mug of warm milk from the kitchen, something simple but nourishing. "Here, dry off and drink this." She took the towel with trembling hands, wiping her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking just a little. I really just need work. Any work. I can clean, cook, tend the fields, whatever you need. Please." I sat across from her, studying her face. There was no pleading whine in her tone, just raw honesty. "Why here? Why now?" She sipped the milk slowly, her eyes distant. "My mother's in the hospital in San Jose. Cancer. The bills are piling up, and I lost my job waitressing when she got worse. I heard about farms up here needing seasonal help. I walked and hitched rides for 2 days to get here. I don't have much, but I work hard. I promise I won't be a burden." Her story hit me like a gust of wind through the olives. Simple, heartbreaking, but delivered without self-pity. I thought of my own isolation, the weight of the estate pressing down on me. And then I remembered her rushing to help Mrs. Evelyn, no questions asked. In a world where everyone seemed out for themselves, like my aunts and uncles, she was different. "All right," I said finally. "We'll give you a trial. Start tomorrow. Cleaning the main house and helping in the kitchen. Room and board included, plus a fair wage." Her eyes widened, tears welling up but not falling. "Really? Thank you, Mr. Hart. You won't regret it." As she stood to leave, thanking me again, I watched her walk back down the drive. Little did I know that act of kindness, born from a single moment of compassion, had just set my life on a path I could never have imagined. The curse of Heartwood was about to unravel, one unexpected thread at a time. Rose started the next day, as promised. I assigned her basic tasks at first, cleaning the main house, helping in the kitchen with meal prep for the staff, and assisting the gardeners with weeding the paths around the groves. She dove in without complaint, her small frame moving with a quiet efficiency that surprised even Harlan. By the end of the first week, she'd scrubbed the dusty corners of the library that hadn't seen a rag in years, organized the pantry so everything was labeled and accessible, and even pitched in to mend a broken fence post when one of the workers got called away. The staff whispered about her at first. Who was this stranger Mr. Hart had let in? But soon enough, the murmurs turned to respect. She didn't gossip, didn't slack off, and she had a way of noticing when someone needed a hand. One afternoon, I saw her helping old Mrs. Martha, our cook, carry heavy crates of produce from the delivery truck. Martha, who's been with the family since my grandparents' time, patted her arm and said, "You're a godsend, child." I kept my distance at first, watching from afar as I went about my routines, reviewing the soil reports, tasting samples from the latest press, negotiating with buyers for our premium olive oil. But Rose brought a subtle change to Heartwood. The house felt less empty. The air carried the faint scent of fresh-baked bread from her experiments in the kitchen, and the dogs, my 3 old hounds that usually lounged lazily on the porch, started following her around like shadows, wagging their tails whenever she scratched their ears. She treated them with a gentleness that made me pause. One evening I found her in the barn, brushing out one of the horses that we rarely rode anymore. "They get lonely too," she said simply when I asked why she bothered. She never asked for anything beyond her wages, which she sent straight to the hospital in San Jose for her mother's treatments. I checked in with Harlan occasionally, and his reports were always positive. "The girl's a worker, sir, no trouble." But it was more than that. Rose had a resilience that mirrored the olive trees themselves, twisted by wind and drought, but still bearing fruit. She didn't talk much about her past, but bits slipped out. Growing up in a rundown apartment, dropping out of community college to care for her mom, scraping by on odd jobs. "Life doesn't give you choices sometimes," she said once over a quick lunch in the staff kitchen. "You just keep going." One crisp morning about a month later, the peace shattered. I was in my study poring over the latest financials. The estate was profitable, but the maintenance costs were eating into reserves when Harlan knocked. "Your aunts and uncles are here, sir, with the lawyer." I sighed, knowing what was coming. Benedict and Gertrude arrived like clockwork every few months, always with their slick attorney in tow. They pulled up in Benedict's gleaming Mercedes, stepping out in tailored suits that screamed city money. Benedict, tall and balding with a perpetual smirk, clapped me on the back like we were old pals. Nathaniel, my boy, looking rustic as ever. Gertrude, his sister, thinner and sharper-eyed, nodded curtly, her pearls clicking as she adjusted her scarf. We gathered in the formal sitting room, the one with the antique fireplace and portraits of my ancestors staring down disapprovingly. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Ellis with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase full of doom, spread out the documents on the coffee table. "As you know, Mr. Hart," he began in his dry monotone, "the terms of your parents' will are explicit. By your 30th birthday, which is mere months away, you must be married and have a legitimate heir on the way or already born. Failure to comply results in the immediate transfer of Hartwood estate to your aunts and uncles as joint beneficiaries." Benedict leaned back, crossing his legs. "We've got buyers lined up, Nate. Big names in the wine industry. They'll turn this place into something modern, a resort maybe. No more of this quaint farming nonsense." Gertrude chimed in, her voice laced with false sympathy. "It's for the best, dear. You're young, unattached. Start fresh somewhere else. We wouldn't want you to force something unnatural just to cling to this old pile." I sat there, fists clenched in my lap, the weight of it all pressing down like the summer heat. They were right. I had no wife, no prospects, no time for courtship. The estate wasn't just land, it was my parents' legacy, the only piece of them I had left. Losing it would mean losing myself. As they droned on outlining the legal steps they'd take if I failed, a plan formed in my mind, desperate, clinical, but necessary. After they left, their car kicking up dust on the drive, I summoned Rose to my study. She entered quietly, wiping her hands on her apron, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Hart?" "Sit down, Rose." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She did, her expression calm but curious. I didn't sugarcoat it. "I need a wife, a legal one, and a child to secure this estate. My parents' will demands it by my 30th birthday, or I lose everything to my relatives. In exchange, I'll cover all your mother's medical bills, ensure her care is top-notch, and provide for you financially for life if things don't work out. No strings beyond the contract. You don't have to love me, this is business." She didn't react with shock or outrage. Her eyes stayed steady on mine, processing. "And if I say yes, you'll follow through on everything?" "On my word." She nodded slowly, standing. "I'll think about it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the halls, staring out at the moonlit groves. What had I done? Proposing a sham marriage to a woman I'd barely known for a month? But desperation has a way of blurring lines. The next morning, Rose knocked on my study door. "I've decided," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do it. But not for the money beyond what's needed for my mother. And I'll pull my weight here. Hartwood won't fail on my watch." We arranged everything quickly. The wedding was a sterile affair at the Sonoma County Courthouse. A quick ceremony with Mr. Ellis and Harlan as witnesses. No rings beyond simple bands, no vows of love, just legal signatures. Rose wore a plain dress. I was in my usual shirt and jeans. As the clerk stamped the paper, she looked at me and offered a small, resolute smile. "Partners, then?" "Partners," I echoed, shaking her hand. It felt like sealing a deal, not starting a life. But as we drove back to Hartwood in silence, the weight on my chest lifted just a fraction. For the first time in years, I wasn't facing the curse alone. The first few months of our marriage were exactly as we'd agreed. A contract, nothing more. Rose moved into one of the guest rooms on the second floor, far from my suite at the end of the hall. We kept our lives separate, like two ships passing in the harbor, close enough to acknowledge each other, but never docking. I'd see her at breakfast sometimes, where she'd pour coffee and slide a plate of eggs across the table without a word. "Doctor's appointment next week," I'd remind her occasionally, my voice flat. referring to the fertility checks we'd scheduled to ensure the heir part of the deal happened sooner rather than later. She nodded each time, no questions, no complaints. Her focus was on the estate, and she threw herself into it with a determination that bordered on fierce. From the start, Rose proved invaluable. She took over the household ledgers I'd long neglected, poring over them in the study late into the evenings. Within weeks, she uncovered discrepancies, small at first, like overcharged supplies from a vendor, but they added up. It turned out the old bookkeeper, a man Harlan had hired years ago, had been skimming petty cash for personal expenses. Rose presented the evidence to me one afternoon, her notes neat and irrefutable. "We could save thousands by switching suppliers," she said matter-of-factly, "and if we reorganize the staff rotations, the groves could yield 15% more during harvest." I stared at the spreadsheets, impressed despite myself. Harlan grumbled about outsiders meddling, but even he couldn't deny the improvements. The workers started respecting her. Whispers turned to nods of approval as she streamlined the packing process, ensuring the olive oil shipments went out on time and under budget. Profits ticked up for the first time in years, and Rose never once asked for a raise or a pat on the back. Every cent she earned went straight to her mother's hospital bills in San Jose. I'd see the envelopes she sealed, addressed with careful handwriting. She didn't spend on herself. Her clothes remained simple, faded jeans and cotton shirts from her old life. No jewelry beyond the plain wedding band we'd exchanged at the courthouse. The staff gossiped at first. "What's she after, marrying the boss like that?" But Rose ignored it all, her composure like armor. She was unflappable in the face of their stares, responding only with quiet efficiency. One day, I overheard a couple of the gardeners muttering about her being too good to be true, but by the next week she'd won them over by helping transplant a row of young olive saplings during a sudden heat wave. Her hands blistered, but her pace unrelenting. What struck me most was her kindness in the small things. The estate had always felt sterile to me, beautiful but lifeless. Rose changed that without trying. She rescued a stray dog that wandered onto the property one rainy afternoon, its paw injured from a thorn. I found her in the barn bandaging it with strips from an old towel, cooing softly as the animal whimpered. "Poor thing," she murmured. "You've been through it, haven't you?" The dog, a scruffy mutt with sad eyes, licked her hand and followed her everywhere after that. She named him Oliver, after the trees, and he became a fixture around the house, bringing a spark of warmth to the cold halls. One evening, after a long day negotiating with a buyer over the phone, I wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of garlic and herbs. Rose was there, alone, stirring a pot on the stove. An old cookbook, my mother's, dusty from years on the shelf, lay open beside her. "What's this?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced up, not startled. "Pasta alla Norma. From your mother's recipes." I thought, well, you mentioned once that you liked Italian food. Figured it might make dinner less routine. I paused, taken aback. "Why bother? You don't have to cook for me." She turned off the burner, her expression thoughtful. "I don't want to live in a sad house forever, Nathaniel. If you trust me with this place, I'll trust you not to hurt me. Small things like this. They make it bearable." Her words lingered with me that night as I ate alone in the dining room. The pasta rich and comforting in a way I hadn't tasted since childhood. She wasn't just fulfilling a role, she was breathing life into the emptiness. I started noticing more, how she arranged fresh wildflowers from the fields in vases around the house, how she mended the curtains in the library without being asked, how she listened to the workers' complaints and suggested fair solutions. She was steady, unyielding in her decency, even when life had given her every reason to be bitter. As the months passed, though, the one thing we needed most eluded us. Rose wasn't pregnant. The doctor's visits came and went. Tests, advice on timing, reassurances that these things take time. But time was the one luxury I didn't have. My 30th birthday loomed like a storm cloud over the valley, and the pressure mounted. Benedict and Gertrude ramped up their harassment. Anonymous letters arrived, hinting at lawsuits. Phone calls in the middle of the night. Gertrude's voice dripping with mock concern. "Tick-tock, Nathaniel. Don't make us drag this through the courts." I paced the groves at dusk, the olive leaves rustling like whispers of failure. In secret, I began preparing for the worst. I sold off a small, non-essential parcel of land on the estate's edge, discreetly through a broker to build a fund. If we lost Heartwood, Rose and her mother wouldn't suffer. I'd set them up in a comfortable home in San Jose, cover ongoing medical costs, even help Rose start over if she wanted. The thought of her leaving twisted something inside me, but I'd rather lose the land than see her broken by my family's greed. I realized then, staring at the deed transfer papers, that my priorities had shifted. It wasn't just about the estate anymore. Rose had become more than a partner in a deal. She was someone I admired, someone whose quiet strength had cracked through my isolation. I started showing it in small ways. One morning I picked a bouquet of wild lupines from the hillside and left them on her dresser with a note. "For brightening this place." She didn't mention it at dinner, but I caught her smiling as she arranged them in a vase. I began asking about her mother during our rare shared meals, how the treatments were going, if there was anything more I could do. "She's fighting," Rose would say, her voice softening. "Thanks to you." Gradually, she opened up. Late one night, under the porch light with moths fluttering around, she told me about her childhood. A cramped apartment in the city, her father leaving when she was 5, scraping by on her mother's waitress wages. "I learned early that you don't wait for handouts," she said. "You make your own way." I shared bits of my own story. The accident that took my parents, the lonely years under guardians who cared more about the estate than me. For the first time, the conversations flowed beyond business, bridging the gap from strangers to something closer, something real. But the clock kept ticking. As my birthday approached, the doctor's news remained the same. No pregnancy yet. I lay awake nights wondering if the deal would crumble, if I'd lose everything, including her. Little did I know the seeds of change had already taken root, deeper than any olive tree in the groves. The day I turned 30 dawned clear and bright, the kind of flawless California morning that mocked the storm brewing inside me. Sonoma Valley stretched out beyond the windows of Heartwood Estate, the olive groves golden under the sun, rows of ancient trees standing sentinel like they had for generations. But today, they felt like witnesses to my potential downfall. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying every clause of the will, every sneer from Benedict and Gertrude. The air in the house carried a heaviness, even as the staff went about their routines. Mrs. Martha humming in the kitchen, Harlan barking orders in the barn. Rose had been quieter than usual that week, her face pale during our brief meals, but she'd insisted it was just fatigue from the ledgers. "Don't worry about me," she'd said last night, squeezing my hand briefly before retiring to her room. I hadn't pushed. We were still navigating the fragile bridge between duty and something deeper. By mid-morning, they arrived. Benedict's Mercedes pulled up the drive first, followed by Gertrude's sleek SUV and Mr. Ellis's nondescript sedan. They stepped out looking triumphant, Benedict in a crisp polo shirt and slacks, Gertrude with her signature pearls and a silk blouse that screamed old money. Ellis carried his briefcase like a weapon, his expression neutral as ever. Harlan showed them into the formal sitting room, where I'd set up a table with the documents. The portraits of my parents hung on the wall, their painted eyes seeming to judge us all. "Happy birthday, Nathaniel," Benedict said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, clapping me on the shoulder as if we were at a family barbecue. "Though I suppose it's bittersweet, eh?" Gertrude settled into an armchair, crossing her legs. "Let's not drag this out. Ellis, the papers?" The lawyer nodded, opening his briefcase and spreading out the will, amendments, and transfer deeds. He cleared his throat and began reading aloud, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Pursuant to the terms set forth by Elias and Margaret Hart, in the event that Nathaniel Hart fails to marry and produce a legitimate heir by his 30th birthday, the entirety of Heartwood Estate, including all lands, buildings, equipment, and associated assets, shall revert to the surviving siblings of the deceased, namely Benedict Hart and Gertrude Hart, in equal shares. Benedict leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "No wife in sight, no little heir crying in the nursery. We've waited long enough, Nate. Sign the papers and we'll handle the rest. You'll get a fair payout, enough to start over somewhere less burdensome." I stared at the pen on the table, my hand hovering over it. My heart pounded, a mix of rage and resignation. This was it. The end of my parents' dream, the erasure of my life here. But as I reached for the pen, memories flashed. Rose's quiet strength in the kitchen, her hand in mine during our late-night talks, the way she'd transformed this place from a mausoleum into something alive. If I signed, she'd be safe. I'd already transferred the funds from the land sale into an account for her and her mother. But the thought of her leaving, of this all ending in defeat, twisted like a knife. Just as my fingers closed around the pen, the door to the sitting room creaked open. Rose stood there, her face ashen, one hand gripping the frame for support. She was dressed simply in a blouse and skirt, but sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool room. The group turned, surprise flickering across their faces. "Rose?" I stood, concern overriding everything. "You shouldn't be down here. Go rest." She shook her head, stepping forward unsteadily. Her other hand rested on her abdomen, a subtle gesture that sent a jolt through me. "Don't sign yet," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her body. Gertrude scoffed. "Who is this? Your housekeeper? This isn't the time for interruptions, girl." Benedict's eyes narrowed. "Nathaniel, control your staff." But Rose ignored them, her gaze locked on mine. She took a deep breath as if gathering every ounce of strength. "I'm pregnant." The room fell silent, the words hanging like fog over the valley. Gertrude's mouth opened in shock, her pearls forgotten. Benedict laughed, a short, disbelieving bark. "Pregnant? Prove it. This smells like a desperate ploy." Ellis adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. If true, the transfer is suspended pending medical confirmation and the child's legitimate birth. The will allows for an heir in utero, provided paternity is established. Mrs. Martha, who'd been hovering in the doorway with a tray of coffee, stepped forward. Her voice shook but held firm. "I've seen the signs for weeks now. Morning sickness, fatigue, the dizziness. She's been hiding it, but I know. I'll swear to it on a Bible if needed." Benedict's face reddened. "This is absurd. You think we'll just take your word? We demand tests immediately." Gertrude stood, her composure cracking. "You've fabricated this, Nathaniel. Hired some woman to play along? We'll contest it in court." But as they argued, their voices blending into a chaotic hum, I barely heard them. My eyes were on Rose, who leaned against the wall now, her hand still protective over her stomach. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. I crossed the room in 3 strides, ignoring the others, and took her free hand in mine. It was cold, clammy, but she squeezed back. "Are you sure?" I whispered, my voice thick. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I didn't want to say until I knew it would stick. But I couldn't let you lose this place. Not without fighting." Ellis cleared his throat again. "Assuming verification, the estate remains yours, Mr. Hart. We'll need documentation within the week." Benedict slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't over. If that child's not legitimate—" "It is," I cut in, my voice steel. For the first time I felt the weight lift, replaced by a fierce protectiveness. "And you'll leave now. Hartwood stays with me, with us." They gathered their things in stunned silence, Benedict muttering threats under his breath, Gertrude shooting daggers at Rose. Ellis packed his briefcase efficiently, nodding farewell as they filed out. The door shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. Alone at last, the room felt vast and empty. Rose swayed slightly and I guided her to the sofa, kneeling in front of her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was scared," she admitted softly. "Scared it wouldn't last, scared of what it meant. But Nathaniel, this isn't just about the deal anymore. For me, at least." I placed my hand gently on her abdomen, feeling the faint warmth through her blouse. A child. Our child. Tears blurred my vision as the reality sank in. Not just salvation for the estate, but a future, a family. "For me too," I whispered, pulling her into an embrace. She leaned into me, her body relaxing for the first time that day. In that moment, the curse shattered, replaced by something real, something we'd built without even realizing. The months that followed were a quiet transformation, like the slow ripening of olives under the Sonoma sun. Hartwood Estate, once a symbol of isolation and obligation, began to feel like a home. Our home. I accompanied Rose to every prenatal appointment, sitting in the sterile waiting rooms of the local clinic, my hand on her knee as the doctor listened to the heartbeat that echoed like a promise. Strong and steady, the doctor would say, and Rose would smile faintly, her hand covering mine. I learned to brew herbal teas for her nausea, stocking the kitchen with ginger and peppermint, and I'd bring her a cup in bed each morning, watching as she sipped it slowly, her free hand resting on the growing swell of her belly. Rose's health was my constant worry. The pregnancy wasn't easy. She tired quickly, her ankles swelling from the long days she insisted on keeping busy. But she refused to slow down entirely. "This place needs me," she'd say, and in truth it did. Under her guidance, the estate flourished. She implemented transparent accounting, rooting out any lingering inefficiencies, and the workers came to admire her not as an outsider or a convenient wife, but as the true lady of the house. Mrs. Martha consulted her on menus, Harlan deferred to her on supply orders, and even the gardeners sought her opinion on planting rotations. Whispers of doubt faded. In their place, a quiet loyalty grew. "She's got a good head on her shoulders," Harlan admitted to me one evening over coffee. "And a kind heart." As her belly rounded, our evenings together deepened. We'd sit on the porch after dinner, the dogs at our feet, Oliver curled protectively near Rose. We'd talk about the future, not the cold terms of our deal, but real dreams. "What if it's a boy?" she'd muse, her voice soft in the twilight. "He could learn to tend the groves, like you." I'd nod, imagining a child running through the trees free from the burdens that had weighed on me. "Or a girl," I'd add, "strong like her mother." Rose would lean her head on my shoulder then, and in those moments the contract felt like a distant memory. Our touches grew natural, a hand on her back as she stood, a kiss on her forehead before bed. It wasn't passion born of fire, but something steadier, built from shared silences and mutual respect. Benedict and Gertrude vanished from our lives like shadows at noon. After the confrontation, their threats ceased. Ella sent a formal letter confirming the suspension of any claims pending the child's birth. We heard through town gossip that they'd turned their attentions elsewhere, perhaps scheming over some other inheritance. For the first time, Heartwood was truly mine, ours, without the specter of loss hanging over it. The birth came in early spring, as the olive trees burst into bloom, their silvery leaves whispering in the breeze. Rose's labor started at dawn, a sharp pain that woke us both. I drove her to the hospital in Santa Rosa, my knuckles white on the wheel, her breaths measured and calm, even as contractions gripped her. In the delivery room, I held her hand, wiping sweat from her brow, murmuring encouragements as the hours stretched. "You're strong," I told her, over and over. "We've got this." When our son finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, the doctor placed him in my arms. He was tiny, perfect, his little fist closing around my finger with surprising strength. I stared down at him, tears streaming unchecked down my face. This life we'd created, not out of love at first, but from necessity that had blossomed into something profound. Rose, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch his cheek. "He's here," she whispered, her eyes shining. "We did it." We named him Elias after my father, a quiet nod to the legacy we'd fought to preserve. The hospital room filled with a peace I'd never known, the beeps of monitors fading into the background as I handed him to her. Watching her cradle our son, her face soft with wonder, I felt the last remnants of the curse dissolve. Back at Heartwood, life settled into a new rhythm. Elias's cries echoed through the halls, turning the once silent house into a symphony of beginnings. Rose recovered slowly, but she glowed with motherhood, nursing him under the olive trees on warm afternoons. The staff doted on him, Mrs. Martha knitting tiny booties, Harlan carving a wooden mobile from olive branches. Even the dogs seemed gentler, lying watchfully nearby. One perfect afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the valley, we sat beneath the oldest olive tree on the property, a gnarled giant that had stood for over a century. Elias slept soundly in Rose's arms, his tiny chest rising and falling. The air smelled of earth and blossoms, the groves stretching out like a green sea. I took her hand, threading my fingers through hers. "If it hadn't rained that day," I began, my voice thick with emotion. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her smile serene. We'd have missed each other. I nodded, pulling her closer. Heartwood was no longer a curse or a burden. It was our home, alive with laughter and light. Our family had started as a bargain, forged in desperation, but through kindness, patience, and courage, true love had grown from it. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I knew we'd turned the page. The estate, the groves, the life we'd built, it was all ours now, unbreakable.